Hello there, and welcome to the Sleeping Architecture channel. Tonight, we are drifting to a world of shadow and golden light. We are leaving behind the noise of the modern day, the sharp edges of our cities, and the bright glare of our screens. Instead, we are traveling back 400 years to a time when stone was made to behave like water, and when buildings were designed not just to house people, but to capture the divine. Tonight, we begin our journey into the Baroque. So, get comfortable. Close your eyes if you wish, or watch the candlelight flicker against the wall. Let your breathing slow down. We are going to Rome, but not the Rome of ruins, and not the Rome of perfect, logical circles. We are going to a Rome that is about to wake up from a long, symmetrical sleep. To understand the drama of the Baroque, we must first understand the silence that came before it. Imagine, if you will, the world of the High Renaissance. It is the early 1500s. The air is filled with the dust of rediscovered marble. Architects like Bernini and artists like Raphael are obsessed with one thing: perfection. In their minds, God is a mathematician. Therefore, the perfect church, the perfect building, must reflect the perfect logic of the universe. They loved the circle. The circle has no beginning and no end. It is equal in all directions. It is calm. It is rational. Picture a Renaissance facade. It is flat. It is like a drawing on a piece of paper. The columns stand in polite rows, like soldiers at attention. The windows are square or rounded, evenly spaced. Everything is balanced. If you were to stand in front of a high Renaissance palace, you would feel a sense of stability. It is quiet. It makes sense. It whispers to your intellect, telling you that the world is orderly and predictable. But history, as we know, is rarely orderly. And it is certainly not predictable. Just as these architects were perfecting their circles and squares, the world outside began to burn. In 1517, a monk named Martin Luther nailed a piece of paper to a church door in Germany. It was a list of complaints, but it acted like a hammer striking a pane of glass. The Catholic Church, the great patron of the arts, cracked. The Protestant Reformation had begun. Suddenly, the stability of the circle didn't feel right anymore. How could you build calm, rational churches when the streets were filled with arguments about the soul? How could you rely on cool logic when Europe was tearing itself apart over passion and faith? The Renaissance had built a beautiful stage, but the play had changed. The audience was no longer sitting quietly, they were storming the exits. The church needed a way to bring them back. They didn't need logic anymore. They needed awe. Let us move forward in time, drifting through the smoke of the mid-16th century. We find ourselves in the city of Trent in northern Italy. It is cold here. The mountains loom high above. Inside a great cathedral, the most powerful men in the Catholic Church have gathered. This is the Council of Trent. They have been arguing for years, decades, actually, about how to save the church. They discussed theology, they discussed money, they discussed corruption. But then, they discussed art. This is the moment the seed of the Baroque was planted. The council decided that art and architecture should not just be for the educated elite who understood complex geometry. It should be for everyone. It should speak to the illiterate, the poor, the weary. They declared that art must be emotional. It must be clear. It must be persuasive. When a believer walks into a church, they shouldn't just think, "Oh, what a mathematically balanced ceiling." No. They should drop to their knees. They should feel the weight of glory. They should feel the presence of the infinite. The church essentially decided to create the greatest special effects show the world had ever seen. They needed architecture that could preach. But there was a problem. The architects didn't know how to do that yet. They were still using the old language of the Renaissance, the flat walls, the static columns. They needed to invent a new language. They needed to make the stone speak. We return to Rome. It is now the late 1500s. The sun is setting over the Tiber River, casting long, orange shadows across the cobblestones. In the center of the city, a new church is rising. It is the Church of the Gesu. It belongs to a new order of priests called the Jesuits. The Jesuits are the soldiers of this new era, intellectual, intense, and utterly dedicated to the drama of salvation. They hire an architect named Giacomo della Porta to finish the face of their church. Now, look closely at this building in your mind's eye. At first glance, it looks like a Renaissance church. It has columns. It has a triangular pediment on top. But look closer. Something is different. In the Renaissance, the columns were usually flat against the wall, like a relief carving. But here, at the Gesu, the columns are stepping forward. They are fully round. They look like they are carrying weight. And the wall itself, it isn't just a flat screen anymore. The center of the church steps forward, projecting out toward the street. It is subtle, but it is revolutionary. The building is no longer just sitting there. It is confronting you. It has a direction. It is pushing into your space. The scrollwork on the sides, those two great swirls that connect the wide bottom story to the narrow top story, they are not just structural supports. They are fluid. They look like waves curling over. The rigid geometry of the square is beginning to melt. The Gesu was the first breath of the Baroque. It wasn't fully awake yet. It was like a statue, stretching its limbs after a 100-year nap. But the intention was there. The architecture was beginning to move. Let us step inside the Gesu. Push open the heavy wooden doors. The first thing you notice is the space. In the old cathedrals of the Middle Ages, the aisles were cluttered with columns, blocking your view. In the Renaissance, the spaces were often divided into complex geometric compartments. But here, the space is wide and open. It is a single, vast hall. Why? Because the Jesuits wanted you to hear the sermon. They wanted you to see the altar from the moment you entered. The architecture focuses your attention like the lens of a camera. And then, there is the ceiling. Look up. In the early days, it might have been simpler, but as the Baroque style matured, this ceiling became a window to another dimension. They painted it to look as if the roof had been torn open. Figures of angels and saints aren't just painted on the plaster, they are painted on cut-out panels that overlap the frame. Shadows are painted onto the gold leaf to make the clouds look 3D. It is a trick. It is an illusion. But standing there, in the dim, incense-filled air, you believe it. You feel as though you could float up through the roof and into the sky. This was the goal of the early Baroque. To dissolve the walls. to make the physical world feel permeable, as if the spiritual world is leaking through. As we come to the end of our first 15 minutes, the stage is set. Rome has been rebuilt. The popes are spending fortunes to turn the city into the capital of the world. The static, peaceful logic of the Renaissance has been shattered by the need for emotion. The architects have learned that walls don't have to be flat. They have learned that light can be controlled. They have learned that a building can tell a story. But the true explosion hasn't happened yet. The style is still polite. It is still holding back. Waiting in the wings are two men who will change everything. One is a charming, brilliant sculptor who can make marble look like soft flesh. His name is John Lorenzo Bernini. The other is a brooding, melancholic genius who will twist stone into shapes that defy geometry. His name is Francesco Borromini. In our next chapter, these two giants will collide. They will take the polite movement of the Gesu and turn it into a whirlwind. They will make walls ripple like curtains and domes spiral like stars. But for now, let the image of the Gesu rest in your mind. The sun has set in Rome. The stone is cooling. The city waits for the dawn of the high Baroque. If you are joining us for the first time, settle in. If you were with us for Chapter 1, welcome back to the twilight streets of 17th century Rome. Last time, we watched as the rigid lines of the Renaissance began to soften. We saw the church decide that buildings needed to feel, not just think. We left the city waiting for a spark, a catalyst to turn the desire for drama into stone reality. Tonight, that spark arrives. Tonight, we are not looking at movements or councils, but at two men. Two architects who hated each other, who fought a war using marble and mortar, and in doing so, carved the face of modern Rome. This is Chapter 2, the duel in the eternal city. Let us begin in the sun. Imagine a man walking through the Vatican. He is handsome, charismatic, and followed by a crowd of admirers. He holds himself like a prince, though he is an artist. This is John Lorenzo Bernini. Bernini was the definition of a prodigy. He could carve marble before he could read. By the time he was in his 20s, the Pope practically treated him like a son. To Bernini, the world was a theater stage, and he was the director. His vision of the Baroque was about synthesis. He didn't just design a building, he designed the sculptures inside it, the paintings on the walls, and even the way the light hit the floor. He believed that architecture should overwhelm you with beauty. Picture the Cornaro Chapel. It is small, tucked away in a side church. But when you look at it, you aren't looking at a wall, you are looking at a performance. Bernini carved the members of the Cornaro family sitting in boxes on the side walls, carved in marble, leaning forward as if they are watching a play. And center stage? The ecstasy of Saint Teresa. The marble here doesn't look like stone. The robes of the saint look like crumpled silk. The clouds look like vapor. And above, hidden behind a pediment, Bernini installed a yellow glass window. He hid the light source so that golden rays seemed to pour down from nowhere, freezing the moment in a perpetual, divine spotlight. Bernini's Baroque was joyous. It was loud. It was the architecture of confidence. He made stone look weightless, as if the buildings themselves were floating up to heaven on a cloud of incense. But while Bernini was basking in the sun, someone else was working in the shadows. If Bernini was the actor, Francesco Borromini was the brooding philosopher. Borromini was not handsome. He was not charming. He was often described as melancholic, intense, and difficult. He dressed plainly. He didn't care for the social games of the papal court. He cared only for geometry. He started as a humble stonecutter, working with his hands in the dust. He knew the material better than anyone. While Bernini was making statues that looked like flesh, Borromini was obsessing over the structure itself. He didn't want to cover the walls with gold and statues to hide the architecture. He wanted the architecture to be the decoration. Walk with me now to a busy intersection in Rome. It is noisy and cramped. On one corner stands a tiny church, San Carlo al Quattro Fontane. It is so small that the entire building could fit inside one of the piers of St. Peter's Basilica. But look at the facade. It is not flat. It is not even curved like a simple cylinder. It undulates. It curves in, then out, then in again, like a serpentine wave. It is a mathematical impossibility made real. Borromini took the solid wall and made it breathe. Inside, the church is a white, geometric miracle. There is no gold here to distract you. Just pure, white stucco. The dome above is an oval, a complex, honeycombed shape of crosses. And octagons that get smaller as it goes up, forcing your eye toward the light. Bernini wanted to dazzle you with spectacle. Borromini wanted to twist your mind with geometry. He wanted you to feel the tension of the calculus in the stone. Rome wasn't big enough for both of them. Their rivalry became legendary. They insulted each other in the streets. They sabotaged each other's reputations. There is a famous story, perhaps a myth, but a telling one, about the Fountain of the Four Rivers in Piazza Navona. Bernini designed the fountain. One of the statues, the figure representing the Nile, has his head covered with a cloth. Legend says Bernini did this so the statue wouldn't have to look at the church Borromini built right in front of it. In return, the statue of Saint Agnes on Borromini's church stands with her hand on her chest, looking worried, as if she is afraid Bernini's fountain is about to collapse. Whether true or not, the story captures the essence of the time. The city was their chessboard. Bernini got the big commissions. He built the massive colonnade embracing St. Peter's Square, the arms of the church welcoming the world. It was grand, simple, and overwhelming. Borromini got the difficult jobs, the awkward corners, the renovations. But he turned those limitations into genius. He proved that you didn't need space or money to create drama. You just needed a ruler and a compass, and the courage to bend the rules. Tragically, the story ends in darkness for one of them. Borromini, consumed by depression and the feeling that he was overshadowed by his rival, took his own life. He destroyed his drawings before he died, terrified that his enemies would steal his ideas. Bernini lived to be an old man, celebrated as the greatest artist of his age. But tonight, as we drift through the quiet streets of Rome in our imagination, we can see that the city needed both of them. Without Bernini, the Baroque would have lacked its joy, its theatricality, its golden light. Without Borromini, it would have lacked its intellectual depth, its complex curves, its daring movement. Together, they took the static stone of the Renaissance and set it on fire. They proved that a building could be a stage, and it could be a mathematical puzzle. They proved that stone could express the deepest human emotions, ecstasy, fear, awe, and melancholy. Conclusion. The sun rises over the Piazza Navona. The light hits the water of Bernini's fountain and reflects onto the curves of Borromini's church. The rivalry is over, but the stone remains, locked in an eternal dance. Next time, we will leave the heat of Rome. We will travel north, crossing the Alps, to see what happens when this Italian drama meets the cold light of France and the fervent piety of Central Europe. We will see the Baroque transform again into palaces of mirrors and endless gardens. But for now, leave the two masters to their rest. The curtain falls on Rome. Tonight, we are leaving the warm, golden twilight of Rome. We are packing our bags and traveling north. We are crossing the snow-capped peaks of the Alps, leaving behind the chaotic, winding streets of the Italian capital. As we descend into the valleys of France, the air becomes cooler. The light becomes sharper, paler. And the architecture changes, too. In Rome, the Baroque was a shout of religious ecstasy. It was about the church trying to pull your soul up to heaven. But here, in France, the Baroque has a different master. It does not serve God alone, it serves the king. Tonight, we explore the architecture of absolute power. This is Chapter 3, The King and the Mirror. To understand this shift, we have to understand the man standing at the center of it all. Imagine a figure standing in high heels, covered in silk and diamonds, with a wig that cascades down his back like a lion's mane. This is Louis XIV, the Sun King. He didn't just rule France, he believed he was France. He famously said, "L'état, c'est moi, I am the state." For a man with an ego that size, a normal palace was not enough. He needed a stage. But interestingly, when the Italian style of Baroque arrived in Paris, the French didn't exactly welcome it with open arms. In fact, there is a famous story that illustrates this clash perfectly. In 1665, our old friend John Lorenzo Bernini, the genius of Rome, the man who made marble breathe, was invited to Paris. He was asked to design a new facade for the royal palace, the Louvre. Bernini arrived like a rock star. He looked at the French architecture and, typical of Bernini, he insulted it. He said the roofs looked like they were made for carding wool. He proposed a design that was full of Italian drama, curves, movement, deep shadows. The French hated it. They rejected the great Bernini. Why? Because the French Baroque was not about wild emotion or religious fervor. It was about order. It was about control. They didn't want their buildings to look like they were melting or moving. They wanted them to look eternal, stable, and incredibly imposing. They sent Bernini home and built a facade of straight, rigid columns instead. This rejection marked the birth of a new kind of Baroque. If Roman Baroque was a wild, emotional opera, French Baroque was a military parade. It was grand, yes, but it was disciplined. And the greatest example of this discipline is not in Paris, but a few miles outside of it, in a place called Versailles. Let us drift there now. Imagine approaching the Palace of Versailles. It is not just a building, it is a city disguised as a house. As you walk toward the golden gates, you realize that everything is designed to make you feel small. The scale is inhuman. The facade stretches out for hundreds of yards, a rhythmic repetition of windows and columns. It doesn't undulate like Borromini's churches. It stands firm. It says, "I am here, and I am not moving." But the true genius of Versailles isn't just the stone, it is the glass. Come inside with me. We are walking up the marble stairs, past the velvet ropes, into the heart of the palace. We are entering the Hall of Mirrors. In the 17th century, mirrors were incredibly expensive. A small mirror was a luxury item. To line an entire hall with them was an unimaginable display of wealth. But Louis XIV didn't do it just to show off his money. He did it to control the light. On one side of the hall, there are 17 massive arched windows looking out over the gardens. On the opposite wall, there are 17 matching arches filled with mirrors. When the sun hits the windows, the light crashes into the mirrors and bounces back. The room dissolves in a blaze of light. In Rome, light was used to create mystery, to hide the corners in shadow so you felt the presence of God. Here, light is used to expose everything. There are no shadows in the Hall of Mirrors. There is nowhere to hide. The king is the sun, and his palace is a machine designed to amplify his radiance. And finally, we must look out the window. The French Baroque didn't stop at the walls of the building. It conquered nature itself. Look at the gardens designed by André Le Notre. In an English garden or a modern park, trees are allowed to look like trees. They grow wild and free. At Versailles, that was forbidden. The trees were trimmed into perfect cones and cubes. The bushes were planted in complex geometric embroidery patterns. The water didn't flow in natural brooks, it was forced into vast, flat sheets that reflected the sky like glass. This was the ultimate message of the French Baroque: the king is so powerful that even nature obeys him. The chaos of the forest is tamed into geometry. The unruly water is forced to be still. It is a terrifyingly beautiful kind of control. As the sun sets over the Grand Canal at Versailles, the golden light fades from the mirrors. The court goes to sleep. The rigid geometry of the gardens disappears into the dark. We have seen how the Baroque served the church in Rome, and how it served the state in France. But what happens when this style travels even further? What happens when it reaches the snowy forests of Germany and the imperial cities of Austria? Next time, the discipline will shatter. The straight lines of France will be broken into a million pieces of gold and pastel. We will see the Baroque turn into something lighter, frothier, and infinitely more playful. We will see the birth of the Rococo. But for now, let the silence of the great hall of mirrors surround you. The king is asleep. If you remember, in our last chapter, we were standing in the hall of mirrors at Versailles. We were surrounded by the cold, hard brilliance of the French court. Everything was rigid. Everything was controlled. The trees were cut into cubes, the water was forced into flat sheets, the mirrors reflected the absolute power of the king. It was impressive, yes, but it was also severe. Tonight, we are leaving that discipline behind. We are packing our bags and traveling east. We are crossing the Rhine River, moving into the deep, dark forests of Bavaria, and further down along the winding currents of the Danube into Austria. The landscape here is different. It is a land of fairy tales, of snow-covered pine trees and jagged mountains. And here, in the heart of Central Europe, the Baroque does something unexpected. It starts to dance. To understand the architecture here, you have to understand the mood. It is the early 18th century. The wars that had ravaged this part of the world are finally over. There is a sense of relief, a collective exhale. The local princes, bishops, and emperors want to celebrate. They have seen the grandeur of Versailles, and they want to copy it, but they don't want the stiffness. They want the glory, but they also want joy. So, what happens when you take the dramatic curves of Rome and mix them with a desire for lightness and play? You get a style that looks less like a building and more like a wedding cake. You get the Rococo. Let us begin our exploration in Würzburg, at the Prince Bishop's residence. Imagine walking up to this massive palace. From the outside, it looks serious enough: yellow sandstone, rows of windows. It looks like a standard palace. But open the doors and walk toward the staircase. In most buildings, a staircase is just a way to get from the first floor to the second. But here, the architect Balthasar Neumann turned the staircase into a spiritual experience. As you start to climb, the room is dim. The walls are relatively plain. But as you ascend, step by step, the ceiling begins to reveal itself. It is a massive, unsupported vault, an engineering miracle that spans a huge distance without a single pillar to hold it up. And covered across this entire expanse is the largest fresco in the world, painted by the Venetian master, Tiepolo. As you climb higher, the ceiling seems to open up. You aren't looking at plaster anymore, you are looking at the sky. The painting depicts the four continents of the world, Europe, Asia, Africa, and America, all paying homage to the Prince Bishop. But look at the colors. They aren't the dark, shadowy tones of the early Baroque. They are luminous. Pale blues, rosy pinks, sunny yellows. The figures seem to float. Clouds spill out of the painting and turn into 3D stucco sculptures that hang over the edge of the frame. A painted leg might dangle out of a cloud, while a real stucco cupid holds a painted curtain. The line between what is real and what is painted has vanished. The walls have dissolved. As you reach the top of the stairs, you feel weightless, as if the architecture itself has lifted you up into the clouds. But we must travel further to see the true climax of this style. We are leaving the city now. We are traveling deep into the Bavarian countryside, to a place called Wise. Imagine a green meadow at the foot of the Alps. Cows are grazing. It is quiet, rural, and simple. And there, sitting in the middle of this pasture, is a white church. This is the Wieskirche, the church in the meadow. From the outside, it is simple. But step inside, and you are instantly transported into the mind of a confectioner. If Roman Baroque was about heavy, dramatic stone, this is about light. The Zimmermann brothers, who designed this place, didn't want you to feel the weight of the building. They wanted you to feel like you were inside a miracle. The columns aren't made of cold marble, they are made of scagliola, a mixture of plaster and glue that can be polished to look like gemstones. But they aren't just straight columns. They are white, but they are painted with gold, and they seem to melt. The capitals, the tops of the columns, erupt into sprays of golden leaves and flowers. Everything is white and gold, but it is not stark. It is a creamy, warm white. The light floods in from clear windows, bouncing off the curved walls. There are no dark corners here. God is not hiding in the shadows, he is in the light. Look at the ceiling. It is a fresco, of course, but look at the stucco work that frames it. It looks like whipped cream. It looks like sea foam frozen in time. The curves are asymmetrical. This is the hallmark of the Rococo. In the Renaissance, if you had a curve on the left, you had to have a matching curve on the right. Here, the curves are organic. They twist and turn like vines growing wild. It is playful. It is delightful. It feels fragile, as if a strong wind could blow the whole thing away like dandelion seeds. And that is the point. The architecture is trying to deny that it is made of brick and mortar. It is trying to be spirit. Finally, let us drift down the Danube to the Great Melk Abbey in Austria. Perched on a rocky outcrop overlooking the river, Melk is a fortress of God. It is massive, painted a warm, sunflower yellow that glows against the blue sky. We are going to the library. In the 18th century, knowledge was sacred. And this library is a temple. The floor is made of intricate wood inlays. The shelves are filled with thousands of leather-bound books, their spines glinting with gold leaf. But look up. The ceiling is not a flat roof, it is another opening to the heavens. But the most magical detail here is the light. There are hidden windows, concealed behind the balcony, that direct light onto the gold decorations. As the sun moves across the sky throughout the day, the room changes. In the morning, it might sparkle with a cool, crisp light. By the late afternoon, the entire library glows with a deep, honey-colored warmth. This is the ultimate achievement of the Central European Baroque. It brings together everything: painting, sculpture, architecture, light, and landscape into one Gesamt Kunstwerk, a total work of art. It is sensory overload, but in the softest, most gentle way possible. It is like being wrapped in a warm blanket of gold and pastel. It doesn't demand your submission like the French Baroque. It doesn't demand your fear like the early Roman Baroque. It simply asks for your joy. But as with all sweet things, one can have too much. As the 18th century wore on, this style became frothier and frothier. It became so delicate, so decorative, that some people began to find it frivolous. They looked at the pink angels and the golden vines and asked, where is the substance? Where is the truth? The world was changing again. The age of kings and bishops was beginning to crack. A new era of reason, of science, and of archaeology was dawning. People began to tire of the sugar-coated architecture. They started to crave something cleaner, something simpler, something that reminded them of the ancient democracies of Greece and Rome. The party was almost over. The candles were burning low. But for tonight, the music is still playing. The gold is still shining. The angels are still dancing on the ceiling of the church in the meadow. Let us stay here for a moment longer, suspended in this beautiful, weightless dream of pastel and light. Drift along the Danube. Watch the snow fall on the yellow walls of the abbey. In our last chapter, we were floating in the warm, vanilla-scented clouds of the Bavarian Rococo. We were surrounded by pink angels, golden leaves, and sunlight that seemed to dance on walls made of sugar and stucco. It was a world of pure joy. But tonight, we must leave the light behind. We are putting on our heavy coats. We are traveling northwest, crossing the turbulent grey waters of the English Channel. We are heading to an island of rain, fog, and intellect. We are going to London. This is Chapter 5, The Phoenix in the Fog. To understand the architecture of this city, we cannot start with a building. We must start with a catastrophe. Imagine the date, September 2nd, 1666. It is a dry, hot summer. A strong wind is blowing from the east. In a small bakery on Pudding Lane, a spark jumps from an oven. Within hours, the medieval city of London is not just burning, it is vanishing. For 4 days, the fire rages. It eats the timber-framed houses like dry straw. It melts the lead roofs of the old churches, sending rivers of molten metal running down the cobblestone streets. When the smoke finally clears, the old world is gone. The Gothic skyline, the narrow, twisting alleys, destroyed. London is a smouldering wasteland of ash and charcoal. But in the silence of that destruction, there was an opportunity. The slate had been wiped clean. And standing ready to write upon it was not a priest, and not a sculptor, but a scientist. His name was Christopher Wren. Wren was a fascinating man. Before he was an architect, he was an astronomer. He spent his nights looking through telescopes at the rings of Saturn and the craters of the moon. He was a mathematician, a man of logic. He didn't believe in the emotional, theatrical manipulation of the Italian Baroque. He didn't want buildings that made you cry, he wanted buildings that made you think. When he looked at the ruins of London, he didn't see a tragedy, he saw a geometry problem waiting to be solved. He was given the task of rebuilding 51 churches, including the great cathedral at the center of the city, St. Paul's. Let us walk there now, through the ghostly fog of 17th century London. The streets are wider now, more orderly. As we turn a corner, it rises up before us. St. Paul's Cathedral does not look like the churches in Rome. It is not made of warm, golden travertine. It is made of Portland stone, a white limestone that reacts with the coal smoke of the city. Over the centuries, the rain washes the exposed parts of the stone bone white, while the sheltered corners turn velvet black. The building looks like a black and white photograph developed in stone. It is somber. It is dignified. It has a weight to it that the German Rococo never had. Look at the dome. It is one of the most famous silhouettes in the world. But it is also a deception, a magnificent scientific trick. Wren knew that a dome looked different from the inside than it did from the outside. If he made the ceiling high enough to look good from the street, it would feel like a dark tunnel from the inside. If he made it low enough to look good from the inside, it would look squat and tiny from the city. So, the astronomer built 3 domes. First, there is the inner dome, the one you see when you look up from the church floor. It is painted and gentle, perfectly proportioned for the interior. Then, hidden completely from view, there is a brick cone, a massive, ugly, structural funnel that supports the terrifying weight of the lantern on top. And finally, floating above it all, is the outer dome, a timber frame covered in lead, designed purely to look beautiful against the London sky. It is a masterpiece of engineering, a Russian nesting doll of architecture. Let us step inside. The heavy doors close behind us, shutting out the noise of the city. The air here is cool and still. It smells of old stone and beeswax. In Rome, the churches were dark, with directed beams of dramatic light. In Germany, they were flooded with white light. Here, in St. Paul's, the light is different. It is clear. It is rational. The windows are not stained glass, they are clear panes. Wren wanted the light of reason to illuminate the space. He wanted the geometry to speak for itself. Walk to the center, directly under the great dome. We are standing on a floor of black and white marble diamonds. It feels like a chessboard. Above us, the whispering gallery circles the rim of the dome. They say the acoustics are so perfect, so mathematically precise, that if you whisper against the wall on one side, a person standing on the exact opposite side, over 100 feet away, can hear you as clearly as if you were whispering in their ear. It is the architecture of silence, amplifying the smallest sound. There is a story about the building of this place that captures the spirit of the English Baroque perfectly. One day, while the site was still a mess of rubble, Wren asked a workman to bring him a flat stone to mark the center of the new dome. The workman brought a broken piece of an old gravestone from the ruins. Wren turned it over. There was one word remaining on the jagged stone, written in Latin, resurgam. I shall rise again. It was a message from the past to the future. And rise it did. But it didn't rise as a palace of emotion. It rose as a palace of the mind. Before we end tonight, we must travel briefly out of the city to the countryside. Because the English Baroque wasn't just about churches. It was also about power. We are going to Blenheim Palace. If St. Paul's is the work of a scientist, Blenheim is the work of a dramatist. It was designed by John Vanbrugh, a man who was literally a playwright before he became an architect. Blenheim is not a house. It is a monument. It was a gift from the nation to the Duke of Marlborough for winning a war. And it looks like war. It is heavy. It is essentially a castle pretending to be a palace. The roofline is cluttered with stone trophies, cannonballs, and statues of crushing enemies. It is aggressive. It is the heavy Baroque. It says to the world, we are Britain. We are formidable. We do not dance, we conquer. It is a stark contrast to the light, floating stucco of the Wieskirch we saw in Chapter 4. There, the stone was trying to fly. Here, the stone is trying to sink, to root itself into the earth forever. As the fog rolls back in over the Thames, covering the white dome of St. Paul's, we can see the full journey we have taken. We started with the emotional awakening in Rome. We saw the absolute power of the French king. We saw the joyful dance of the German angels. And now, we have seen the dignified, scientific resurrection of London. The Baroque is not one thing. It is a language that changes depending on who is speaking it. It can whisper, it can shout, it can sing, and it can lecture. But our journey is not quite over. There is one more stop. A place where the Baroque went to escape the old world entirely. A place where it mixed with new cultures, new colors, and new gods. Next time, we are getting on a ship. We are sailing across the Atlantic Ocean. We are going to the New World. We are going to see what happens when the Baroque meets the sun of Mexico and the gold of the Andes. But for now, listen to the rain tapping against the clear glass windows of the cathedral. The fire is out. The city is quiet. In our last chapter, we stood under the cool, grey skies of London. We watched the rain wash over the white stones of St. Paul's Cathedral. It was a place of logic, of science, and of restraint. But tonight, we are thousands of miles away from the fog of England. We have crossed the vast Atlantic Ocean. We have sailed past the islands of the Caribbean, and we have made landfall on the coast of Veracruz. We have climbed up from the humid jungles into the high, thin air of the Central Plateau. Tonight, we are in Mexico. The sun here is different. It is not the soft, golden light of Rome. And it is certainly not the pale, watery light of Paris. It is fierce. It is vertical. It strikes the earth with a blinding intensity, making colors vibrate and shadows stark. And the architecture here has to be strong enough to stand up to that sun. To understand the Baroque of the Americas, or New Spanish Baroque, we have to understand a collision. This is what happens when the complex architectural plans of Europe are handed to the descendants of the Aztecs, the Maya, and the Incas. The Spanish friars brought the drawings. They brought prints of Roman churches and French palaces. They said, "Build this." But the hands that cut the stone and mold the plaster were hands that had spent centuries carving serpents, jaguars, and sun gods. The result is something that exists nowhere else on Earth. It is a style known as the ultra-Baroque. Let us walk into the Zocalo, the great main square of Mexico City. Beneath our feet lie the ruins of the Templo Mayor, the heart of the Aztec Empire. And rising above us is the Metropolitan Cathedral. It took nearly 250 years to build. It is a mountain of stone. But look at the building attached to its side, the Sagrario Metropolitano. This is where the style truly breaks free. In Europe, columns were usually straight, or perhaps twisted like corkscrews. Here, they use a shape called the estipite. Imagine a pyramid turned upside down, then stacked on top of a cube, then another inverted pyramid. It is a shape that defies gravity. It looks unstable, vibrant, as if the stone is vibrating with energy. The facade of this building is not just decorated, it is dissolving. There is no empty space. Every inch is covered in carvings of vines, grapes, saints, cherubs, and flowers. It is a concept called horror vacui, the fear of empty space. In the indigenous mind, emptiness meant death. Fullness meant life. And so, the Baroque here is full to the point of bursting. But to see the true heart of this style, we must leave the capital. We must travel to the city of Puebla, and then a little further, to a small village called Santa Maria Tonantzintla. From the outside, the church in Tonantzintla looks simple. It is painted a rusty red with white trim. It looks like a typical village church. But step inside. Take a deep breath. The interior of this church is, without a doubt, one of the most overwhelming sights in the history of architecture. You are inside a fever dream of color. In Rome, the stucco was usually white or gold. Here, the plaster is alive. Every surface, the walls, the ceiling, the dome, is covered in figures. But these are not the pale, distant angels of Europe. Look closely at the faces of the cherubs. They have dark skin. They have black hair. They look like the children of the village. And look at what they are holding. They aren't just holding harps or biblical scrolls. They are holding tropical fruits. You can see papayas, mangoes, chilies, and cacao beans mold into the plaster. The local artisans took the Christian heaven and filled it with their own paradise. This is Tequila art, the fusion of the conqueror and the conquered. There is a sense of subversion here. The Spanish priests wanted a church to worship Jesus. The indigenous artisans built it, but they hid their own symbols in the walls. In the dome, surrounded by hundreds of staring eyes, you feel the presence of the old gods, Tonantzin, the Mother Earth goddess, hiding behind the mask of the Virgin Mary. It is dizzying. It is colorful. It is a riot of joy and resistance. Now, let us travel to one more location. We are going into the rugged mountains of Taxco. This is silver country. In the 18th century, a man named José de la Borda struck one of the richest silver veins in history. He became fabulously wealthy overnight. And to thank God for his fortune, he built the church of Santa Prisca. It stands on the edge of a ravine. It is a cathedral built on a precipice. Because the ground was so uneven and the space so small, the architect had to build up. The towers of Santa Prisca are incredibly tall and thin. They soar into the blue sky like needles. The stone is a soft, pink limestone. At sunset, when the fierce Mexican sun finally begins to dip below the mountains, the entire church glows like a hot coal. Inside, the altar is a wall of gold. But it is not the polite gold of Versailles. It is a cascade of gold. The retableaus, the great wooden altarpieces, stretch from the floor to the ceiling. They are carved with such complexity that you cannot tell where one shape ends and another begins. It is like looking into a golden fire. This was the purpose of the American Baroque. In a land of earthquakes, volcanoes, and violent history, the architecture tried to create a stability of the spirit. It tried to bring the glory of heaven down to earth and trap it in a cage of gold and cedar. As we stand on the cobblestone streets of Taxco, watching the pink towers fade into the purple twilight, we can feel the pulse of this continent. The Baroque started in Rome as a piece of theatre. It went to France and became a mirror of power. It went to England and became a scientific equation. But here, in the Americas, it became a prayer. A loud, colorful, desperate, and beautiful prayer sung in two languages at once. The sun has set. The crickets are singing in the ravines. The gold inside the church is dimming, waiting for the candles of the morning mass. We have traveled far. We have seen the stone wake up, dance, rigidify, and finally explode into color. But all things must end. The era of kings and colonies is drawing to a close. The modern world is coming. Next time, in our final chapter, we will watch the curtain fall. We will see how this great, dramatic style finally faded away, and what ghosts it left behind in our modern cities. We have traveled through time and space together. We watched the stone wake up in Rome under the hands of Bernini. We saw it stand at attention for the King of France. We saw it dance in the meadows of Bavaria, rise from the ashes in London, and explode into tropical color in Mexico. We have lived through an era of intense emotion, of optical illusions, and of overwhelming beauty. But every party must end. Every dream must wake up. Tonight, the candles are burning low. The wax is dripping onto the floor. The music is fading into silence. We are exploring how the Baroque died and what came after the gold was stripped away. To understand why the Baroque ended, we have to understand that architecture is never just about bricks and mortar. It is about the mind of the people who build it. For 150 years, Europe had been obsessed with the soul, with miracles, and with the divine power of kings. But as the 18th century marched on, a new kind of light began to shine. It wasn't the golden, mysterious light of a church altar. It was the cold, hard light of the Enlightenment. Men like Voltaire and Rousseau began to write. They talked about logic. They talked about science. They talked about the rights of man, not the divine right of kings. Suddenly, the Rococo style, with its pink cherubs, its gold leaf, and its twisting vines, didn't look beautiful anymore. It looked corrupt. It looked like the decoration of a tyranny that had gone on for too long. People looked at the palaces of the aristocracy and they didn't see glory, they see waste. And then, something happened that sealed the fate of the Baroque forever. In 1748, under the shadow of Mount Vesuvius in Italy, shovel hit stone. Archaeologists began to dig up the lost cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. For the first time in nearly 2,000 years, the world saw what ancient Roman houses actually looked like. And they were shocked. They weren't covered in gold swirls. They weren't twisting and undulating. They were simple. They were elegant. They had straight lines, flat walls, and clear, geometric patterns. The world fell in love with this noble simplicity. It felt clean. It felt honest. It felt democratic. And just like that, the curve was banished. The straight line returned. Let us travel to Paris one last time to see this change happen before our eyes. We are standing in front of the Pantheon. It was built right at the end of our timeline. Look at it. There are no twisting columns here. There are no statues of saints looking up in ecstasy. There is just a massive, severe portico of straight Corinthian columns, topped by a perfect, mathematical dome. It is beautiful, yes, but it is cold. It demands your respect, but it does not ask for your love. This is neoclassicism. It is the architecture of the hangover. It is the glass of cold water after a night of too much wine. Across Europe, the change was swift. The plaster angels were scraped off the ceilings. The gold leaf was painted over with white. The velvet curtains were taken down. The world was preparing for revolution, and revolutions do not like frills. But can you really kill a style as powerful as the Baroque? I like to think that it didn't die. It just went underground. It hid. It hid in the opera house. While the government buildings and banks became stern and grey, the theatres kept the gold. They kept the red velvet. They kept the drama. Because even in an age of reason, we still need a place to feel. It hid in the cinema. When you watch a movie today, and the camera swoops and dives, manipulating your emotions, using light and shadow to make you cry or scream, that is the spirit of the Baroque. It is the art of the spectacle. And it hides in our dreams. So, let us take one final look back. Close your eyes and remember the journey. Remember the heat of the Roman sun hitting the travertine of the colonnade. Remember the infinite reflection of the mirrors at Versailles. Remember the smell of old paper in the library at Melk. Remember the white stone of London against the grey sky. And remember the flash of gold in the dark church in Mexico. The buildings are still there. They are sleeping now, waiting for the tourists of the morning. But the spirit that built them, that desperate, beautiful desire to touch the infinite through stone, that is gone. The curtain falls. The theater is empty. The lights go out. Thank you for traveling with me. We have walked a long road together. We started in the candlelight of 17th century Rome, witnessing the stone wake up from its long slumber. We traveled to the Hall of Mirrors in France, the snow-covered abbeys of Austria, the soot-stained stones of London, and the golden altars of Mexico. In our last chapter, we watched the Baroque die. We saw the cold, hard logic of neoclassicism strip the gold from the walls and banish the curve in favor of the straight line. We saw the world turn sober, rational, and grey. But tonight, in this final, extended chapter, I want to tell you a secret about architecture: nothing ever truly dies. Styles are like tides, they recede, leaving the sand bare, only to crash back against the shore with even greater force. Tonight, we are looking for the ghosts. We are looking for the moment when the world realized that rational was boring, and that we needed the drama back. Let us drift forward in time. We are leaving the 18th century behind. We are moving through the smoke and steam of the Industrial Revolution. It is the mid-19th century now. The factories are humming. The trains are running on time. The world is becoming faster, louder, and richer. And suddenly, the rich merchants and the new emperors of Europe realize something. They have money. They have power. But their cities look too serious. They look like museums of logic. They want to show off again. They want a stage. And so, the Baroque wakes up from the grave. This is the era of the Neo-Baroque. To see it, we must return to Paris. But we are not going to the severe pantheon we saw last time. We are going to the heart of the social life of the 19th century. We are going to the Opera Garnier. Imagine standing in front of it on a rainy Parisian night. The street lamps are reflecting on the wet pavement. And rising above the traffic is a building that looks like a wedding cake made of diamonds and gold. Charles Garnier, the architect, didn't care about the quiet dignity of the Greeks. He wanted a spectacle. He used 17 different types of material: marble from Italy, stone from Sweden, bronze, gold leaf, mosaic. He mixed them all together into a frenzy of texture. Let us walk inside. If the Baroque of Bernini was about the soul, the Baroque of Garnier is about the body. It is about being seen. We walk up the grand staircase. It is the most famous staircase in the world. It curves and sweeps like a flowing river of white marble. The balconies are lined with onyx. The statues hold up lamps that cast a warm, flattering glow on the skin. This building was designed for one purpose, so that the people walking up the stairs could look at the people walking down the stairs. It is architecture as a mirror of vanity. Look up at the ceiling. It isn't a view of heaven anymore, it is a view of a party. The chandeliers weigh tons, dripping with crystal. It is heavy, it is opulent, it is excessive. It is the Baroque returned, but this time it has lost its religion and found its wallet. This spirit didn't stay in Paris. It jumped the ocean again, landing in New York and Newport, Rhode Island. This was the Gilded Age. The American millionaires, the Vanderbilts, the Astiers, built cottages that were actually palaces. They covered their walls in gold, not for God, but to prove they had arrived. The spirit of the Baroque became the spirit of capitalism. But the journey doesn't end in the 19th century. You might think the Baroque disappeared when modernism arrived. You might think that when the glass skyscrapers of the 20th century rose up, boxes of steel and concrete, the curve was finally destroyed. But the Baroque is a shapeshifter. When it was driven out of stone, it fled into a new medium. It fled into light. It fled into the screen. Think about the cinema. What is a movie theater? It is a dark room where you sit in silence, looking up at a glowing rectangle that shows you a world more beautiful, more dramatic, and more emotional than reality. Does that sound familiar? It is exactly the same experience as a peasant standing in a dark Roman church looking up at a painted ceiling. The special effects of Hollywood are the direct descendants of the painted illusions of the Jesuits. When you watch a superhero movie, and the camera flies through the air, defying gravity, spinning around the characters, that is the camera of the Baroque. It is the spirit of Bernini, liberated from the laws of physics. And finally, look at the architecture of our own time. For a long time, we built boxes. But look at the works of Frank Gehry or Zaha Hadid. Look at the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. It is made of titanium, not stone. But look at the shape. It ripples. It waves. It catches the light and shatters it into 1,000 reflections. Computer software has allowed us to return to the complex curves that Borromini drew by hand. We are bending walls again. We are making buildings that look like liquid. The digital Baroque is here. We are once again obsessed with movement, with complexity, and with overwhelming the senses. So, as we come to the end of our series, what have we learned? We learned that architecture is not just shelter. It is a language. The Renaissance spoke of logic. The Baroque spoke of emotion. The Neoclassical spoke of duty. And the modern spoke of function. But the Baroque is the language of the heart. It is the part of us that isn't satisfied with a plain white wall. It is the part of us that wants magic. It is the part of us that wants to believe that the roof can open up and reveal the stars. The stone of Rome is still warm. The mirrors of Versailles are still shining. The gold of Mexico is still glowing. And the screen you are looking at right now is the newest window in the old cathedral. We are drifting away now. The tour is over. The lights of the opera house are dimming. The projector in the cinema is cooling down. The digital fluid of the modern city is settling into silence. You can rest now. The drama is finished. The history is written. Thank you for listening. Thank you for walking through the centuries with me. Welcome to the silence of the sleeping architecture. Good night.